Let's kick things off with a question that's, well, it's kind of weird when you stop and think about it.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into what drives all life, and that's reproduction. But here's the puzzle. Why do organisms pour so much energy into making more of themselves? I mean, it doesn't actually help them personally stay alive, right?
You eat, you breathe, all that stuff is to keep you going. But reproduction? That's a huge energy cost. So what's the deal? Why even bother?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll hit the big why. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of DNA and variation. After that, we'll look at the two big strategies, asexual versus sexual. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together in humans.
All right, let's jump right into that first big question. Why all the effort?
Well, it really comes down to this. If a species doesn't reproduce, it's a one-and-done deal. One generation and poof, it's gone, forever. The only reason we see any life at all is because of this non-stop process of passing the torch. It's all about creating a legacy.
So how does life actually do that? How does it build that legacy? Well, it all starts with copying a very special blueprint. And that blueprint, of course, is DNA. It's this amazing molecule tucked away in the nucleus of a cell, and it holds all the instructions for building an organism. Think of it like a recipe book for proteins. So, if you're going to make a new organism, step one is you've got to copy that recipe book.
And this whole process is like a beautifully choreographed dance inside the cell. First, you photocopy the DNA. Then, you make copies of all the other cellular machinery. And once everything's duplicated, the cell just splits right down the middle, creating two new identical cells ready to go.
But here's where it gets really interesting. That copying process, it's not 100% perfect. I mean, think about it. No chemical reaction is ever totally foolproof. So every now and then, tiny little mistakes, we call them variations, get into the DNA copy.
And you might think these mistakes are a bad thing, but they are absolutely crucial for a species to survive long term. Look, if the environment is stable and cozy, sure, perfect copies are great. But what if things change? Imagine a sudden heat wave boils the water where some bacteria live. Most of them, they're toast. But maybe, just maybe, one of them has a random little copying error that helps it handle the heat. That one survives, it reproduces, and suddenly you have a whole new population of heat-resistant bacteria. That's it. That variation is the fuel for evolution.
So, the most straightforward way to reproduce is just to make copies, right? And that leads us perfectly into the first big strategy life uses, asexual reproduction.
This whole one-parent thing can look a bunch of different ways. Sometimes things split, sometimes they grow from little pieces, but the main idea is always the same. It's fast and it's efficient. Let's check out a couple of these methods.
So here we've got fission. It's super simple. You take a single-celled organism, like an amoeba, and it just splits in two. That's it. One cell becomes two brand new individuals. Can't get much more direct than that.
Or how about budding? You can see it here with this hydra. A little outgrowth, a bud, starts growing on the side of the parent. It's basically a mini-me. Once it's big enough, it just pops off and starts its own life. Pretty cool, huh?
So you see the trade-off here, right? Asexual reproduction is fantastic if you want to make a lot of copies of yourself fast. You don't need to waste time finding a partner. But the big downside? Everyone is basically a clone. There's very little variation. And if the environment suddenly changes for the worse, well, that can be a total disaster for the whole species.
So what's the solution to that lack of variation? How can a species speed things up and adapt faster? Well, life came up with a much more complex but powerful strategy, sexual reproduction.
But wait a minute. If you're combining the blueprints from two parents, you run into a big problem. A math problem, actually. If you took all of parent A's DNA and all of parent B's DNA and just squished them together, the kid would have double the DNA. And their kids would have 4 times the amount. It would get out of control real fast.
But of course, life figured out a solution, and it is absolutely brilliant. It created special cells called germ cells, or gametes. You know them as sperm and eggs. And here's the magic trick. These cells only carry half the normal amount of DNA.
So when a half set from one parent combines with a half set from another, the offspring gets the perfect amount of DNA. But more importantly, it gets a totally new and unique combination of traits. This is the huge win for sexual reproduction. It's like constantly shuffling a deck of cards, creating endless new hands. It just pours fuel on the fire of evolution.
Okay, let's bring this all back to something we're all familiar with. Us.
Humans are a perfect case study for just how complex and specialized sexual reproduction can get.
For us, the whole process really gets going during our teenage years, in that phase of life we call puberty. It's when our bodies kind of slow down on the growing taller part and start focusing all that energy on getting the reproductive machinery up and running.
And this process creates two very different, very specialized systems. You have the male reproductive system, which is all about producing and delivering sperm, and then you have the female reproductive system, which has to produce eggs and be ready to house and nourish a developing embryo for months.
And this all builds up to that one incredible moment, fertilization. That's when one sperm cell successfully fuses with an egg cell. This creates a brand new cell, called a zygote, and it has a genetic code that has never existed before. That single cell then implants and starts the amazing 9-month process of becoming a new person.
So when you look at the whole picture, from a single amoeba splitting in half to the incredible complexity of human reproduction, you realize this is life's master plan. It's how variation happens, it's how legacies are built, and it's how the story of life keeps going.